Hi, everyone. This is Hal Krosman with Screenwriting U, and today we're going to be going through the Pro Series rewrite process. This is the 21 steps to a professional rewrite. Now, let me tell you up front, this is a real class. We're going to go through this whole thing. I promise you're going to have some breakthroughs in the midst of this. If you have not already rewritten things at a professional level, you will see many, many parts of this process that you'll go, oh my God, I got to make sure I do that. My advice to you is two things. One is have your handout out as we're going through and fill in all these blanks very, very quickly so you got them. Second is have another pad of paper out so that you can write down whatever breakthroughs show up for your own screenplay. And the reason I'm telling you this one is because I've had a lot of people say, wow, I was listening and you were talking about these things, and all of a sudden I thought of something I should do in my script. But we kept going because this is, again, we're going to be talking for 2 hours here, and we have a lot to cover. And by the time they got to the end, they had forgotten what it was they were going to do. So keep that extra pad of paper handy and just jot down notes so that you have it. Let me just tell you about who I am real quick. For those of you who don't know, again, I'm Hal. I'm Hal Krosman. I'm a guy who came from the world of corporate training. Back then, for about 15 years, I designed programs for about 125 of the largest corporations in the world. And we did a thing we called expert models, which meant we would go into any industry, we would find out how the top maybe 1% of that industry accomplished what they did. We would put together a model for that, and then we would teach it to everybody else. And so at any company, if they had 1,000 customer service people and 3 of them were doing a better job than all the rest, those are the ones we'd interview, and those are the ones we'd create the model from. We had huge amounts of success, and I would have continued doing that forever. But along the way, I had 3 daughters, and it became this situation where it wasn't okay for me to be on airplanes twice a week, flying out to do training. So we were looking for a place to settle down. I loved the movie business. I'd been writing screenplays, and actually I'd been writing videos for years. But when I got here, I looked around, and it was like, you know what? All the screenwriting classes I took, none of them understood what producers needed. And it started with me asking a really simple question. I would walk up to the screenwriting teacher that I just paid and took their class, and I'd say, let me just ask you, how do you make a deal in this industry? And their answer would almost always be something like, you get an agent. And I'd say, okay, how do you get an agent? And then they would say, you win a contest. And it's like, you know what? Coming from the world of business, where we were meeting with and talking with some of the most important people in any of the industries we worked in, that strategy didn't make sense as your primary strategy. So what I did was, at that point, I started interviewing producers, and we interviewed over 700 producers in the last 12 years. I've interviewed 180 or 120 agents and managers. I've interviewed about, at least 100 A-list screenwriters. I've talked to some of the studio heads. I've interviewed at least 50 execs at studios, making sure that we truly understood this business. The other thing we did was, with every interview, what I was trying to accomplish was to solve the problems of my screenwriters. We have an entire alumni at Screenwriting U, and I'm constantly talking with those people. I just got off the phone. I've been on the phone for 3 hours this morning. And I had some of my top people on the phone, and all we were talking about was, okay, what does it take for them to go from having a certain amount of success, having a couple of movies made, to the kind of success they want, which is at being A-list. So I'm working with people that range all the way from brand new, who are just starting out, and in some of our new classes, to people who have written 3 or 4 screenplays, or 5 or 6, and yet haven't made a deal yet, to people who are just making their first deal, and a lot of times I walk them through their very first deal, all the way up to writers who are already having quite a bit of success, have agents, managers, and are making movies. And the question is, how do we get them up to A-list? So every time I interview a producer, every time I interview a manager or an agent or any of those people, I'm thinking about, what do my writers need? What do they need to succeed? And what do you need to succeed? So I don't ask questions like, "Hey, what's it like to work with Tom Cruise?" I don't ask those kinds of things. But my first question when I started interviewing producers was, I would sit down and I'd turn the tape recorder on, I'd say their name, and then I'd say, "Okay, so let me ask you, what causes you to buy a screenplay?" And that was the start. And then from there, we went in depth into their process. So that's the kind of research we do. That's who we are. Now, we're doing this class today. It's free. The reason we're doing it for free is because it gives you a chance to audition Screenwriting U and to see what we're like, to see what we can accomplish, to see how we think differently than everybody else out there who's teaching screenwriting. And by the way, if you'd like to check out our credibility, simply go to our site, screenwritingu.com. There's a red bar across the top, about 2 inches down. Right in the middle of the red bar, it says Alumni Successes. If you click that link, it will take you to a page where we've got at least 300 deals listed, and you'll see the writer's name, you'll see what the deal was, you'll see their picture, you'll see who the producers were, all that kind of thing. We have little news reports on every time, well, not every time, but most of the time that our writers make deals, we post something and we let our network know about it because we have industry pros in our network. So it's us promoting our writers and also showing what makes our brand completely unique inside this industry. So now as you're thinking about that, let's just jump right into this. So the rewrite process, and some people think rewriting is like a necessary evil. I think it's like the thing that you can be a star at. I think it's the area that most people, you'll see in a couple of minutes, most people give it a fairly light version, even if they do that same version over and over and over and over and over again. It never solves the real problems. I've seen people who tell me they've done 20 drafts of a script, and inside of 2 minutes of talking to them, I can tell there's major holes in that screenplay. And it's not. I'm not being picky or mean or any of that kind of thing. What I'm looking for is what's the thing that'll make the biggest difference for them, because I'm trying to help them move the project forward. So we're going to go through a couple of things here. On the first page, I'm going to give you an overview of the rewrite process. This should make some things really, really clear. For some people, we've had about 40% of the people who have returned evaluations who have said that they had a major breakthrough on this page. So there's some really interesting stuff. Then we'll talk about the Pro Series, which is our professional level class that teaches 300 professional skills that all of those writers who have made deals in our alumni have been through. And then we'll go right into the 21 steps, and I'll take you through those one at a time. We'll get all those blanks filled in. So let's go to this first page. On the right, there's two things on that first page. There's a triangle and there's a rectangle. The rectangle's on the right-hand side. It says purpose of rewrite. Please fill in these words. Number 1, fulfilling your vision. Fulfilling your vision. Now, this is going to sound strange to some people, but I'm going to say this is the number one problem most writers have, is one of two things. Either they have no vision for their script, And what happened was something popped into their mind, and they just went with it, and they just started writing, and it just flowed out. One of the writers I was talking with this morning said somebody just handed them a script and said it was done, and she said she was maybe 25 pages into it, and she went, "Wow, this is just stream of consciousness." And it was like she went back to the writer and asked what the concept was, and the writer couldn't explain the concept. Right? So there was no vision. And that's all it was they had no vision. I was on the phone with a guy 2 days ago. I said, hang on, tell me your story again, and because we're working to get him ready to pitch to producers, and he tells it to me, and it's like, wow, I can't figure it out. I said, all you're telling me is the characters. I have no idea what the concept of the story is. And it took us about 3 or 4 minutes, and that's with me being very direct and asking very specific questions. And we finally figured out what the concept was. And I told it to him. I had him write it down, and I said, okay, so look at it. Is that what your story's about? And he goes, yeah. He says, this is the first time I've had clarity on it. And I said, okay, so now you're really clear on what your story is about. Now what do you need to do to your script to honor that? And he goes, oh, my God. He says, I'll probably have to rewrite 40 pages of it. And it's like, okay. And my response on that was, okay, that's great. Now you know. Make sure every decision comes out of that vision. And that's a huge key to your success as a writer, by the way. Producers are constantly complaining that writers will pitch them one thing that they love, and then when they get the script may start in that place, and then it just kind of wanders off to something else. And if you ask the writer will say something like, well, the characters just took it and ran with it. And it's like, okay, I got it. Or they'll say something like, I just wrote it, and it just kind of flowed out, and I just stayed with that. And it's like, oh, I got that. I'm totally okay with that. But if you want to be professional, you need to make sure that your screenplay is the best possible fulfillment of your vision, not just the draft that flowed out. And this may sound, some of you may be sitting there going, well, God, this guy's really being pushy and bossy on this and that kind of thing. But it's like I work with writers every single day, and we have a ton of writers who are succeeding. And what I notice is the ones who are succeeding are doing something different than the ones who aren't. So this is critically important. I also know that producers, if you pitch a producer you give them a pitch, you give them a concept, and they love it, when they get the script, they're hoping that script is going to be an amazing version of that concept. So that's number one. You've got to have a vision. You figure out what it is, you write it down in 1 or 2 sentences, and then every decision in your screenplay comes out of it. Number 2 purpose of rewrites is solving the problems. Solving the problems. Obviously, you need to solve the problems in your script. There's a lot of times when people think, I've actually had people say, well, they're not going to notice. And I'll go, it only took me about a minute of talking to you about this, and I noticed. And they'll go, well, yeah, but once the reader starts reading it, they're not going to notice. And it's like, oh, they're operating off of that myth, that the no one in Hollywood knows anything myth. And you want to be really careful about that, because almost all the readers in this industry are people who were writers at one point. Most of them have written 4, 5, 6, maybe 10 screenplays, and they got a job as a reader in order to support themselves while they were trying to become a writer. They also have been responsible to their producers to be able to explain what the structure of your script is. So if you have a structure problem, they're going to see it. That's what they do, is they look for those problems. So I would never assume that they won't notice. The job is to fix the problems, solve the problems as early in your process as possible. And then number 3 is elevating quality. Now, this is an area I talk to people all the time who spend a lot of time elevating the quality of the words. They do a lot of wordsmithing. And that's totally a good thing. It's absolutely a good thing. But when somebody is focused almost entirely on wordsmithing, and that happens sometimes, they have a tendency to miss elevating the quality on the other levels. So let's go over to the triangle here. We're going to talk about the different levels of your screenplay. And you'll see we're going to start at the foundation, the bottom of the triangle. We're going to work our way up to the top, which is the tiny details. So, and this will help you know where to solve the problems, where to elevate the quality. At the bottom, number one, please put the word story. Story. And if you want to write these in, story really is about four things. It's about concept, theme, structure, plot. Concept, theme, structure, plot. So those four things go together to make up your story. By the way, your story begins on the very beginning of the very first page, and it ends at the very end of the very last page. Story is present throughout the entire screenplay. So that's why you want to make sure that's happening. Even when I talk to producers and I'll say, what's most important to you in a screenplay? There are certain ones who will say character. And I'll say, okay, great, let me just check real fast. Let's say you have a script with a great character, but the story doesn't work. Do you buy it? And they'll go, oh, no, the story has to work. Now, so you got to know this. Story is incredibly important. There are people who are great plot people, and there are people who are great character people. A lot of times what you got to do is you've got to learn the other part of the process. And so if you're a great character person, that's excellent. That means actors are going to love you. That means directors are going to love you, that kind of thing. You got to now make sure that you're also a great plot person and that you're a great story person. These two, by the way, go together. So when people talk story versus plot, or they argue that on the internet, that doesn't even make sense. These two are married. They're gonna live every moment of this story together. So let's move up to the next one. Number two, put the word character. So this is what we were just talking about. Your character here, You've got a bunch of different characters in your screenplay, but I'm going to say the most important ones, if you want to make a sale, or if you want a producer to take your project on, or if you want an agent or manager to sign you, your most important characters are your lead characters. And I'm lucky. I had the chance to interview 32 different actors, production companies, and I talked with Adam Sandler's producers. I talked with Pierce Brosnan's producers. I talked with Matthew McConaughey's producers and John Cusack's producers. And it's interesting when you talk to an actor's producer because they have two things going on. One is, of course, they want to get a movie made. They want to produce. But the other thing is they've got to take really good care of their actors. And they were constantly saying things like, you know what, my actor needs to stand out. He or she, in the case of Sandra Bullock, it's like they need to stand out. They need to be something really special. So if you have the thing where your supporting characters are better than your lead characters, usually that means two things. Number one is it means that you really do know how to create amazing characters, right? If your supporting characters are phenomenal, that means you know what you're doing. The second it usually means is that you have handcuffed yourself on your lead characters. You have made them, you have focused probably on likability to such a degree that it's difficult for that character to be really intriguing and interesting and compelling. But on the supporting characters, it's like you know what? You have freedom there, so it's like, wow, they're really interesting, and they have flaws, and they say rude stuff, and they don't care whether they're likable or not, and because of that, they're amazingly compelling, right? You just need to bring that over to your lead characters. It's not all about likability. Please know that. Likability, if somebody's obsessed with likability, you can almost guarantee that their lead characters are going to be dull. So that's just a safety tip. Let's move up. Number 3, put the word situation. What are the situations you're putting your lead characters in? And this one, here's the way you can tell this really fast. Do you have a lot of what we call talking heads scenes? Right? Do you have a lot of scenes where you got two people sitting in a diner and they're explaining their backstory? They're talking to each other. If you have very many of those in your script, then you're almost that script's almost dead in the water if you have a lot of those. And yes, there are some of them in movies and that kind of thing. But a lot of times when people who are relatively new to screenwriting, when somebody hasn't made a movie yet, they have a tendency to stop things and have characters talk about stuff. When somebody does it really well, it's because they build in all the other things that we're going to be talking about. But let me just say this. If you have a lot of talking head scenes in your script, it's a huge opportunity to be able to elevate that particular scene by creating a situation that conversation takes place in. And a situation means the circumstances you put your lead characters in. So what are the circumstances, and did they challenge that lead character in some way? Did they make it very difficult for he or she to get where they were going? Did those circumstances set up a situation where we're worried about that character, or we're going, oh my God, I'd hate to be in that spot, or any of that kind of thing? Because you can do that. It's amazing how the same conversation that happens in the diner, we got a husband and a wife and they're having an argument. Okay, great. They're having that argument in a diner by themselves. Okay, yes, that's like normal life. But what if we set that in a different situation? What if we put it, they're having that argument at the family reunion and all their relatives are watching them? Okay, that's one thing. What if we had it be they're both public speakers and now they're up on stage and they're supposed to be doing their regular gig, but in the midst of doing their regular gig, they're having this argument back and forth, right? What if we took the same thing and we put it in a situation where they've both been kidnapped and now they're being held hostage, and while they're being held hostage, they're having this argument? Each one of those circumstances changes the emotion, changes the stakes, makes the conversation so much more interesting because it's being done in a very difficult situation. So something to consider. Now, that doesn't mean you have to go gimmicky, by the way. There's lots of ways to write that. You can find the set of circumstances that actually create the emotional experience you want to create. Number 4. Put the word action, and we'll talk about this later on when we get to the 21 steps, but there are really two different kinds of action. There's the meaningless action, and there's meaningful action. Very few scripts really go into meaningful action, and if you can get to where you can do that, if you can get really good at presenting meaningful action, you're going to be a star. Move up. Number 5, put the word dialogue. And we're going to talk about dialogue later on, but let me just say this, and please put this note. Dialogue is not about telling your story. So write that down. Dialogue is not about telling your story. Now, that's one of those rules that, of course, there are 100 exceptions. And, of course, there are times when dialogue does tell the story. But that's not the primary purpose of dialogue. And until you know and understand that, it's like when you pick up a script and the two characters are constantly telling the story back and forth to each other, or they're constantly talking about their backstory, or they're constantly talking about what's happening right in front of them. You know what? It doesn't go very far. People don't end up reading that script in this industry very much. So I would be really careful about that. So when we get to that part, you're going to love what you learn on that one. Number 6, please put the word words. Words. So now at this point, if you've got everything going on and working down below that, number 1 through 5, now it's time to do wordsmithing. People have a tendency to do wordsmithing early in the process. And there are some people who wordsmith constantly as they write. It's just the real problem with that is that it has a tendency to reduce creativity, and a lot of people don't know that. But it's like if you're wordsmithing constantly, if you're editing your words constantly as you write, you are applying two different processes. You're creating and then you are critiquing at the same time. Those two processes don't work well together. What you want to be able to do is you want to be able to create without having something ripping your words apart as you create. If every sentence is getting torn apart and changed and all that kind of thing, it's like you have no idea to the degree to which you're shutting your own creativity down. And it's just something to consider. You'll notice there's a line across there, right across number 4, that says surface on the left-hand side. What that means is everything below that is beneath the surface. Everything above that is on the surface. You'll notice that it goes right through the middle of number 4. There is action that is on the surface. That's visual action. We're watching the chase on the screen. We're watching these people fight it out, right? We're watching arrows fly, whatever it is. That's all visual action. Then there's action that's meaningful action. That part is beneath the surface. Everything beneath the surface, we as an audience perceive on an unconscious level. So you want in some way to start to be able to master what's beneath the surface. And let me explain this in a way. I think this will make sense almost immediately. You probably remember the movie Pulp Fiction. The second scene of the movie, I remember watching it, and the second scene, we've got these two guys driving along. One is Vincent, played by John Travolta. The other is Jules, who is played by Samuel L. Jackson. They're driving along and having a conversation. Now, if you watch this, you can watch it in different ways, but if you watch it, let's just say, I'm just going to take it straight through dialogue from the beginning, I'd like to tell it to you through dialogue, and then I'll come back and tell it the other way. You probably know the scene. This is a hit scene, right? So we got two guys driving along. They're having a conversation. What are they talking about? What do you call a quarter pounder in Paris? Right? They're talking about drugs in Amsterdam and stuff like that, but it's like they're engaged in this conversation. They're interested in this conversation. They pull into the parking lot, and at this point they actually pull out a gun or some guns out of the trunk, and there's a couple of sentences at that point about they should have brought a shotgun. That's about all. Now they go get in the elevator. What are they talking about in the elevator? Right? These two guys are having this whole conversation about, is it okay for a dude to give a chick a foot massage? And they're doing it because Vincent has just been told by the boss that he needs to babysit the boss's wife. And the last guy who babysitted the boss's wife gave her a foot massage, and so the boss threw him out the window, down a couple of stories. So Vincent is concerned about that because, and this is what we find out when we get to the door. They finally get out of the elevator. They go to the door of this apartment. We find out that Vincent is the king of foot massages. But Vincent says, hey, it doesn't mean anything, man. And Jules says, really? If giving a foot massage doesn't mean anything, then would you give me a foot massage? Right? And they're having this whole conversation. Then the door opens. Now, these two guys step in. It looks like what we've got is three college kids sitting there, and Vincent goes to the back and basically is behind them. Jules steps to the front and steps into what he's great at, which is giving speeches. Now, look at what the conversation is about now. There's a little bit of, first there's a conversation about the Big Kahuna Burger, right? And because they're talking about burgers. Then there's a conversation about this briefcase. Vincent goes and gets the briefcase. Then there's an interrogation that goes on, and then Jules says a Bible verse. Now, if we paused right here, really, if you looked at just the dialogue, would you know what this story's about? If we take out the part about the guns, what we've got is we got two guys talking about burgers on the way there. Then they're talking about, is it okay to give a foot massage? Then they go inside. They're discussing burgers again. They talk a little bit about a briefcase, and then there's a Bible verse quoted. Can you tell what's going on from the dialogue? And my guess is that you can't. That could happen anywhere. And I'm going to talk to you about why in just a moment. But this is the thing. You'll see the key down there, right underneath the triangle. It says, put the blank beneath the surface. Put in the word meaning. Put the meaning beneath the surface. This is the big key. Now let's look beneath the surface just for a moment so that you can see this. On the action level, we got two ratty-looking guys. They pull in. They pull out guns. They now go up. They walk into this apartment, and they take total control of the environment. They interrogate this one guy, Brett. When he doesn't answer the question the way he should, they shoot the guy next to him. Brett's now just about peeing his pants. They then, at that point, when they don't get everything they want, they say a Bible verse, spin, and open up fire on the guy. Now, from the action, can you tell what this is about? And my guess is the answer is yes. You can tell this is a hit, right? Let's go down to the character level. And by the way, on the situation level, that's what it is. It's a hit. It's a punishment because these guys took the boss's briefcase with whatever's inside that briefcase. That's the situation. On the character level, this is where I think, people say Quentin Tarantino's dialogue's amazing. And it's like, it is. It really is. He's really good at dialogue. But what you need to see is that Quentin Tarantino is also really good at putting meaning beneath the surface. On the character level, what you would normally see in this situation is two guys driving along planning how they're going to do this hit. They would talk about it all the way up there. They would decide who's going to go where, when, all that kind of stuff. They would go inside and they would do it very quickly. What Tarantino did was something very, very different. So let me just let you know, up front, he is using this scene intentionally as a writer and a director and a producer to lure Samuel L. Jackson into playing the part. That's what this is. Please know that. This is a professional decision. He wrote this scene to cause an actor to want to play this role. And in fact, if you go to IMDb, you'll see Samuel L. Jackson's made like 140 movies. But the one he's most known for is Pulp Fiction. And ready for this? The scene he is most known for is this scene. So this was intentionally done to lure an A-list actor or a semi-A-list actor into being part of this movie for almost nothing. So that's where you're going with when you create a character introduction. You're trying to get that kind of thing. Now, but let's talk about the character. Here's what they do have. They're not doing the things we see most people do. they're doing the things that make sense for who they are. Now, if you think about this, if you have a roofer on top of the roof, let's say you have two roofers up there, if they've done 500 roofs before, they're not going to be talking about roofing because they already know how to work together. They already know how to do all the roofing. They know exactly what they're doing, right? In fact, they've done it so much that it's monotonous. It's second nature. They don't even have to think about it. Instead, what they're talking about is their girlfriend. They're talking about what they saw on TV. They're talking about what they're going to do for the weekend. They may be talking about something having to do with politics or religion or who they're upset with, those kinds of things. So let's look at these two guys, because most people say, well, they don't talk about the thing that they're doing and hardly at all. And it's like, right. And that shows something. If they're they're on the way to do a hit, which has got to be somewhat intense, right? It's got to be something that has you going, wow, that's got to be somewhat stressful. But they're not stressed, right? They're so relaxed that they're engaged in these conversations about burgers and foot massages and all of that. And when they get on the inside, it's like the guy's having fun. The Jules character is having a great time. He's interrogating the shit out of this guy. He's messing with his head constantly, right? The entire thing he does, including the Bible verse, is like it's him doing his shtick as a hitman, right? So these two guys clearly know each other's signals. They have clearly worked together. Right? There are a couple of times in there where they say something really, really simple, and you get it. Outside the door, they're still talking about foot massages, and finally Jules says, hey, let's get into character. Right? And it's like they both know what that means. They both know what they're about to do. They both know exactly where each one of them is going to go. When they go inside, there's no questions between the two of them. Vincent goes to the back. Jules wants to do the performance. That's what they do. And the moment that Jules says the Bible verse, Vincent pulls his gun because that's the cue. It's time to start shooting. Right? They've done this before, so that's where we're getting who they are as characters. They're proficient. They know what they're doing, and they clearly work together. So from a story perspective, this is the inciting incident, essentially, of a major change, a character arc that is going to go on for Jules. That takes us all the way to the very last scene, where we find out that Jules chooses not to kill Honey Bunny's boyfriend. And the reason why is because of the last thing that happened in this first scene, which was a guy burst out of the bathroom with a gun in his hand, fires 6 shots at him point blank, and misses every single time. And Jules took that as a sign from God. So in the very last scene, he doesn't choose to kill Honey Bunny's boyfriend. All he wants is his wallet back. And once he gets that, he sends them on their way. And it's like, and he's had a profound change that has occurred in his life. So this scene is a significant scene. It also lured in actors because of the way it was written. But a big part of it was that the majority of the meaning was put beneath the surface. So that's what you want to go for. It's one of the keys of being a pro. Now, I left out something here. On the right-hand side of the triangle there, number 7, please put the words subtext on levels 1 through 5. Subtext on levels 1 through 5. So let's fill in these blanks down below. Definitions for rewriting. This is one of the places where people have big breakthroughs. Early in my career, I had a group called Great Scripts. We had 600 screenwriters on it, and I had just taken a class on rewriting screenplays, and they had given me a process. So I went on Great Scripts and I said, let me ask, how many people use this process? And if not, what is your process that's different? And I did a survey. Here was the process I gave them. you start at the beginning of your script. You open it up on your computer. You start at the very beginning. You start reading through. As you're reading through, you're making changes to the words for the most part. You're changing description. You're editing description. You are making changes to the dialogue, that kind of thing. Every once in a while, you make a change to an action. But for the most part, the focus is on description and dialogue. And you keep reading through and making those changes all the way to the very end of that script. So I said, how many people is that your rewrite process? Out of 105 that returned the evaluation or the survey, 99 said that was their rewrite process. So it was 99 out of 105. Now, here's the thing to notice. If you look at the triangle, that means their entire rewrite process happened on levels 5 and 6, and it barely touched levels 4. They didn't change situations, they didn't change characters, they didn't change plots or structure. And what they were doing was what I call editing. So write in this definition. Editing. Working with what you already have to make it read the best it can. That's editing. You're working with what you already have to make it read the best it can. So that makes sense. Editing is a valuable process. It's absolutely worthwhile. What wasn't happening was that they weren't hitting the stuff beneath the surface. I had a screenplay I did that process with. I did 17 rewrites. At the end of 17 rewrites, I sent it to a script consultant. She came back and she said, wow, your writing is really good, but you missed a whole bunch of things. And she had a list of like 10 things that were under the surface where there was a mistake, there was a problem. And those 10 things had existed throughout every single one of those rewrite passes that I'd done, those editing passes. So here's the thing. Editing makes your words read really well, but it doesn't solve the problems beneath the surface. So rewriting, let me give you that. Rewriting is improving the major and minor parts of the first 5 levels. Improving the major and minor parts of the first 5 levels. Now, normally I would say the levels 1 through 4. But the reason why I've made it levels 5 is because a lot of times level 5 points to your subtext. You don't want level 5 explaining your subtext. You want it just pointing to. You want us to experience the subtext without being told what it is. But other than that, it's like, you know what? If we went back to the Quentin Tarantino scene that we were just talking about, it's like so much of it happened beneath the surface. Really, truly, I'd say the majority of the real meaning happened beneath the surface. It was touched on in the dialogue. There were points where it was said directly in the dialogue, but the majority of the real meaning came from beneath the surface. So what we need to do is we need a rewrite process that goes beneath the surface. And once you have that, then what's beneath the surface is going to be amazing. And it's going to make a huge, huge difference for you. Let's finish up this one. It says, continue to be blank as you rewrite, and your script will be amazing in the end. Please put the words continue to be creative on levels 1 through 4, and your script will be amazing in the end. So look beneath the surface and continue to be creative. If you do that, you will stand out from the other 100,000 screenwriters that are trying to break in this year. And I'm serious. It is astounding how much of the work is done entirely on the surface. So the more you can get beneath the surface, the more professional you look. Hey, if you can, pull out the very last page. And I want to talk with you for a minute about the Pro Series, which is our professional level class that is responsible for all the deals you see on the Screenwriting U site. Now, this is a program that you can do online. You can do it from anywhere in the world on pretty much any schedule, as long as you're willing to give it 60 to 90 minutes a day. And by the way, if you're already writing every single day, this just replaces your writing time, because you will be writing a screenplay as you go through this program. But if you're not giving your writing 60 to 90 minutes a day, then this is a great way to build that habit. You need to be writing every day. You really do. That's a big part of moving yourself towards success. So this program is designed. It really is a comprehensive program that is designed to have you understand and be proficient at the skills that producers are going to expect you to have. A lot of times I have people say, I need an agent, I need a manager, or something like that. They've written one screenplay or maybe two, and yet they're missing half of the skills in this program. And they don't know it. And they won't know it until they get to the point of actually working with somebody in the industry who's a professional, and then all of a sudden they will show up like huge red lights. So you really, truly do need to learn these things. The way I created this program was I had a screenwriting program we created early on, but then by the time I had about 100 writers that I was working with, I stood back and I interviewed them. And I said, let me ask, what are the problems that you're having? What are the things that are keeping you from breaking in? What are the things that are keeping you from getting in the door? What's missing for you? And then I got their list, and then I went to producers, and I said, what's missing for you from the writers who are coming to you that you're saying no to? And I got their list. So out of that, then I started interviewing producers and agents and managers to fill in all those missing gaps. So you'll see right off the bat, the very first module, if you look at the right-hand side, you see a whole list of modules, and I'll be brief on this. The very first module is all about how do you create a marketable concept in the high concept class. Now, for people who don't know, concept, when you decide on what your project's going to be, in fact, it's probably the very first decision you make. That's the most important marketing decision you make. It really is. It's like later on people say, well, how do I get to this producer? How do I get to that producer? And I say, what's your pitch? And they tell me their pitch. And it's like, I have no idea how you can get to that producer with that pitch. There's nothing we can do with that pitch. You need to actually come in with something that's really interesting and compelling, because you're asking somebody to spend $5 million, $10 million, $50 million on that screenplay, and they need to know that they're going to get their money back. And just to be clear, the original idea is the thing that's going to show up in the 30-second spot or the 2-minute trailer that promotes that movie. So concept's the most important decision you make as a screenwriter. So our first module, we just decided up front, we're going to make sure that you understand the process of how do you create high concepts. Now, I know that there's people out there talking about it. I've been working on this and doing it for 10 years. And we designed this process about 8 years ago. I've had hundreds and hundreds of our writers end up getting scripts in to pretty high places and making deals because they came in with high concepts. The other things that I see out there, most of them don't actually address how you really do it. What we did was I went in and sat down with producers and I watched their meetings as their teams brainstormed ideas. And I did this at 3 different production companies. One of them I came in 4 different times and watched their brainstorm meetings. And I created a model out of it that gives you 12 different ways to brainstorm concepts. And so when people say, a lot of times people will tell me their pitch, and I'll say, wow, let me ask you, how did you decide on that one? And the majority of the time when they have a bad idea, they'll say the way they decided on it was it just popped into their head. right? They were in the shower, this idea just popped in their head, and they started creating. Or they were talking to a friend, and they went, "Oh, that would be a fun movie," and then they just went with it, right? Or they were watching something on TV, and they went, "I wouldn't do it that way. I'd do it this way," and they had a different way to do it. And it's like, okay, but they didn't stop and go through a development process. So that's the thing that we do that is incredibly valuable. You first come up with, during this program, I'll give you 12 ways to come up with marketable concepts. You come up with between 40 to 60 ideas during this 10-day module. At the end of that, you narrow it down, and then you do a development process on the top ideas to make sure they work, and then you take them out and actually test them with your friends. And I'll give you a way to test them that is not asking them for feedback, and it's not asking them to give you a rating. What we're looking for is an emotional response when you say the concept. So, because that's what's going to pull an audience into a theater. So by the time we're done with this, you're going to know more about how you create concepts than 98% of the screenwriters out there. You really are. And I'm talking only in the very top, the pros know how to do this stuff. Even some pros actually don't know how to do it. But you're going to be amazing at this. You will have it down. You'll understand how you can create concepts. And so the next time it's time for you to create a script, you won't just go with the idea that popped into your head. You'll brainstorm 30, 40, 50 ideas, and you'll pick the best out of 50 instead of the best out of one. So this module makes a huge difference in moving somebody to professional. Let me go down a couple other modules. Number 3 there is creating characters for A-list actors. Now, we interviewed 32 different actors, production companies. What I found out in the midst of those interviews was some really valuable stuff. It's like what most people don't know is that very often actors are making decisions early in the process of looking at your script. In fact, there are many actors who are making a decision after they read their character introduction. So if you're introducing them in the first 3 pages, there's a lot of people who, at the end of those 3 pages, they're going to make one of 2 decisions. Do I continue reading this script, or am I done with it? And when somebody has a slow character introduction or a bland character introduction, or they introduce them as an average guy and they don't do anything more than that, you've got a real problem, because that actor is done at that point. And it's not just that. When I was talking to the actors' production companies, I was like, really? So they stop reading as soon as they've done with their character introduction? And I'm not going to point to who. I'm not going to say the names of the actors on this. But I had 4 different producers say they will throw tantrums. They will throw the script at me. They will stand up and rip the script apart. They'll throw it in the trash, stuff like that. And it's like, okay, that's right. They're kind of prima donnas. That's part of what their lives are about, right? They're and they're expecting to be treated like royalty. I got it. But our job is to lure them into reading this script, falling in love with this character, and making sure that the actor signs on. So that means you're going to create this character in a certain way. So what we did was we went through and interviewed these actors, producers, and found out exactly what they needed to see in those character introductions, what it was that needed to happen with that character in order to have it be something that an actor would want to sign on to. So this module starts with all the basic stuff, traits and subtext and character subtext and flaws and motivation and paradox and, all of those kinds of things, right? All the regular character stuff. But once you've got that down, then what happens about halfway through the module is then we transition into the professional stuff, which is what is it that makes an actor feel special doing this role? What would cause them to feel like they want to be known for this particular role, right? And it's like you take a character that you created in the beginning or you've already created, and you make a few minor changes to them. You emphasize certain parts. You highlight the things that would make them a really special character, and suddenly this character that's really kind of the same suddenly flies off the page. So that's where we're going. Modules 4 and 5 are all about how do you make every single page of your script as interesting as possible. And here's the news you need to know. You no longer have the luxury of a dull page. You cannot let a single page of your screenplay be dull. In fact, the truth is you need to do everything you can to keep people's interest. So I'm going to give you a whole series of techniques for doing that in those two modules. Then when we get down to module 6, now we're talking about subtext. I'm going to give you a model that makes subtext so simple, so obvious, so clear that you can build subtext into every page of your script. And I'm talking about having an audience perceive what's going on under the surface. Right? That's way more important. You do not want your subtext to be talked about a lot in the dialogue. And we'll give you a complete model for how to do that. In Module 7, the Advanced Dialogue module, that one we give you 47 different ways to say any line of dialogue, which means you will never, ever be stuck again trying to figure out, oh my God, how can I say this line? So there's so many ways you could do that. Module 8 and 9, the first 10 pages, and then the ending. Most people don't know that these two are business decisions that you're making that producers will see. Now, this is kind of a surprise to some people. The first 10 pages, the reason that's a business decision, there's so many reasons. You're introducing your lead characters and that kind of thing. But it's also, those are the pages that are going to lure people into the story. But even more important, when you go to the studio, and I've talked with a bunch of studio execs about this, there are some studio execs that just don't have time. So what they do is instead of reading the entire script, they read the first 10 pages and the coverage report that came in. So the studio will do coverage on the script. The exec will just read the coverage report so they know kind of a summary and how their reader felt, and then they'll read the first 10 pages to get a feel for the writer's way of writing. Producers know that, so they need those first 10 pages to be amazing. On the ending, this one's a business decision for an even bigger reason. When that movie gets in the theater, it is, it's going to play. Usually what happens is the studio puts a third of the marketing budget on the 2-3 weeks before the movie comes out. And then the other 2/3 are going to be after the movie premieres, after that first weekend. Now, here's what a lot of people don't know, though. Monday morning, the studio meets. And if that movie didn't bring in the right numbers, they cut that marketing budget, which means to the producer, that means that, here's a movie that was about to make tremendous profit, and it just tanked. It just died. And it's out of the theaters inside of a week once they cut the marketing budget. So it's a huge business decision. Now, why I'm talking about this right now is because the ending is what creates the buzz. It creates the word of mouth. When people come out of a movie theater, if you stand out there, like let's say you go to the 9 p.m. showing and you're standing in line, you're watching people coming out of the movie theater, you're going to see about 1 out of 4 of them is on their cell phone. They're either texting or they're talking to somebody, and what they're doing is they're either recommending the movie or they're trashing it. A lot of it has to do with that ending. And everybody knows this. So when they read your ending, if all you do is wrap it up, your ending failed. You need to make sure that your ending creates buzz, that it creates some kind of experience, or it has some kind of visual or something in the very ending that engages people again, that has them come out of the theater and saying, wow, you've got to see this movie. And if you do that, when a producer reads your script, they're going to go, okay, this thing's going to pay off. So this kind of stuff makes a huge difference. Let's go to the very last module at the very bottom, number 10, creating a complete marketing campaign for your script. This one is the longest module of the program, and in many ways it probably makes the biggest difference of this program. Here what you're going to do is we're going to show you exactly what causes producers to say yes. And I must have done at least 100 interviews where I specifically did this pattern. I'm talking with producers. I would say to the producers, let me ask you, do you ever read query letters? If they said yes, then I would go down the query letter path, and I had a whole series of questions I asked them about query letters. What caused you to read the ones you read? What hooks you in? What makes you think the writer's a professional? What caused you to request the screenplay? And on the ones that you didn't, what caused the opposite of those kinds of things, right? I would actually lay 6, if I was in their office, I'd lay 6 different query letters out in front of them. 4 of them would be the styles that are being taught out there by some, there's people who are teaching styles from 10 years ago that no longer even make sense in this industry. So I'd lay those out on the table. I'd lay out the 2 that we've been teaching, and the producer I'd say, which of these would go in the trash? And almost always the 4 from the old days, from 10 years ago, bam, straight into the trash. I'd say, okay, tell me, what about these other 2? What do you think about them? But, if you just glance at them, is there one that causes you to want to read it? Right? So I'm going through all of that kind of process, and then finally we would have them actually read it. So they were just glancing up until this point, because that's what they do on email, by the way. Then we would have them actually read it and tell me what they think about that and what would cause them to request it or not to request it. So I do all that kind of stuff. If when I said, do you read query letters? If they said, no, I don't really read query letters, I'd go, okay, great. But you do pitch, right? Because producers, and I don't know if you know this, but producers pitch all the time. It is part of their daily life. That's what they do. So they know how to pitch, and they're also being pitched on a regular basis. So you have to know what you're doing. So if they said, if they didn't read query letters, then I would ask them 15 questions straight about pitching, trying to understand more and get more depth on what causes somebody to be able to succeed when it comes to pitching versus the other side of the coin. And so what we did was we got it down to a very, very clear picture as to why producers say yes to writers. So this module is all about that. You create 4 pitches. You create your phone pitch. You create your 1-sentence pitch. You create your synopsis, and you create your query letter. The synopsis and the 1-sentence pitch are what you use in a pitch fest. So we will give you exactly how to do those things. Then you get on the phone with us and you do a one-on-one coaching call where we go over your marketing materials to make sure they're the best they can be. Just to let you know, one of the reasons our writers are more successful than anybody else in the screenwriting training world is because our writers are getting in more doors than anyone else, and it's because of this module. So that's how the program is laid out. It's 6 months. You learn 300 skills. You write the best script of your life so far. At the end of that, you're then invited into our alumni. And our alumni is an incredible group of writers, many of which are succeeding right now. We have a good percentage of them who have already made deals. Over 300 of them have made some kind of deal. So you're coming into a writers group that is highly supportive, where people work together, where they are focused on what it takes to succeed in this industry, and where any advice you get comes from people who are already making deals, and any feedback you get comes from people who have been through this class. So the feedback is really high, the advice is really valuable, but it's also an amazing network. So the moment you come into our alumni, you have an instant network in this industry. So the regular price on this program is $1,100. So right now you can get in for about $300 off. Total price right now you can get in for $800. If you need a payment plan, it's $250 up front and $100 a month until it's paid off, with $50 of the upfront money being part of the fee for setting that payment plan up. So, and by the way, the easy way to do that, we'll send you an email with an evaluation. You can ask any questions at that point, but if at that point you want to join us, you just click one of the links that's there and jump right in. I promise you, if you join this program, you will learn so much, and you will be so glad you went through it, because now you will have all the bases covered, and you will understand all of these important skills that you're going to need when it comes time to work with producers. Okay, let's now go on to the 21 steps. So please pull out that page, the rewrite steps, and we're going to jump right in. Also, at the same time, if you can keep your triangle out, that will give you a chance to kind of go back and forth, because we're going to start at the base of that triangle, and we're going to work our way up to the top. What you want to do is you want to make sure your foundation works, and all these other things before you ever get to wordsmithing. You're going to see wordsmithing is like steps 18, 19, 20, or 19, 20, 21, like that. So, starting at level 1, make sure the story works. Number 1, get clear on your structure. Now, this is a really valuable exercise I'm about to give you here, and it's something that most people don't do. But the moment you do it, you can find out exactly how your structure works. Because most people, once they've gotten past that first draft, they no longer see their structure. They're writing in scenes, right? And they're creating moments, and they're focused on dialogue and everything else. But what you need to do is you need to go back to that structure and make sure it's the best it can be. If you have a dull structure, you very likely are going to have a dull script, and you're going to be fighting an uphill battle to make it interesting. So this gives you a chance to make sure your structure is as compelling as it can be. So here's the easy way. You go through and you just simply list out the beats of your structure. I've got them here on the, if you were doing a 3-act structure, opening, inciting incident, act 1, turning point, etc., down to final page. You list out those beats, and then you put one sentence behind each beat that gives the essence of that particular beat. So, like for instance, a long time ago, I was working on a lady's script, and I did this for her. And I came back and I said, so here's your opening. Husband and wife wake up in the morning. She cooks breakfast, and they get in an argument. And she said, well, it's so much more than that. And I said, well, but from a structural perspective, that's all it is. And she goes, well, don't you like the banter? And I said, yeah, their banter is really good. Your dialogue's really good, but you got nothing here on this. It's not interesting from any other perspective besides the banter. Now, she didn't know that before. We then went to the inciting incident. The inciting incident was the wife, while doing dishes, sees a TV commercial with the Eiffel Tower and decides to go to Paris. And it's like, okay, that might be how it happened in real life, but that's also a fairly dull inciting incident. Your inciting incident needs to propel that person on the journey and to propel the audience on the journey. So if her deciding to go to Paris was only based on that, how could we elevate that? How could we take that to a new level and make it be something that we have to go to Paris with her because that moment shifted us, right? So I went through and I listed out all of these. It turned out she had 2 or 3 that were very interesting once we got to the conflict and that kind of thing. She had 1 that was completely missing, and then the rest were fairly dull. In about 20 minutes, we were able to elevate all the dull ones and solve the one that was missing. Now, up until that point, she was living in the entire screenplay. Now suddenly it was all on one page, and it gave her a chance to be able to work with it. So I like doing this thing of isolating something and focusing entirely on it as a way of making sure that you can elevate the entire screenplay. Let's go to number 2. Number 2, present your audience/reader with an unforgettable conflict. An unforgettable conflict. Going back to that lady, I said, what's the conflict of your movie? And she says, well, my lead character is going through emotional concerns and withdrawals and doesn't know really what it is that she wants. And it's like, okay, so that's her internal state. I'm with you. What's the conflict of the movie? What's the main conflict this whole movie's about? Right? And it's like, sometimes asking that question it's kind of tough to separate from how you feel it's about. It's like you're going to have one experience, but we need to hand an audience something that the moment that they even hear that conflict, they want to be engaged, right? The other thing we need something that they're not sitting in the movie going, what's this thing about? I don't get it. Which is when you have characters that just have internal conflicts and there's no external expression of those conflicts, that's the kind of experience that often happens. Now, it's totally okay to have characters with internal conflicts. That's a good thing. But you need to connect it to something external that it's being expressed through, and it needs to be powerful. Often the other way happens. I'll say, what's this movie about? And they'll say, oh, the mob is going to kill this other mob. And it's like, all right, okay, that's the external thing, but what's the internal thing? What's going on? You got it there. We got a mob war. I can see that. Absolutely, that's an amazing and interesting set of visual entertainment. Now, what's the internal, right? So sometimes you have to go back and forth between those. Key ingredient. What is the emotional dilemma? What is the emotional dilemma? Now, your job is to get your audience so emotionally engaged that they forget their lives. If you can do that, you're a star. And a lot of the times the way you do that is through an emotional dilemma. That means that you set your lead character up with a decision that they have to make that both sides are unacceptable. Both sides are equally bad, but they have to make it, right? And this is something that it could be work versus family. It could be love versus money. It could be integrity versus success. Whatever it is, what you're going to do is set it up so that the person has to, and by the way, how integrity versus success would end up being something that both sides are unattractive, both sides are equally negative, is the only way they would get success is by violating their integrity. And the only way they would keep their integrity is by losing the success. So either way, they're going to lose. If you can set that up in your movie, what happens is, early on, you start to build a case for both sides, why they should let go of their integrity in order to have success, why that has to happen. Then you build a case for why they should keep their integrity and give up success. And the case gets stronger, 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 until when we get to that third act, we as an audience are an emotional wreck because we have no idea what we would do in that situation. And if you can do that, then that character has to make that decision, and they're going to give up something. And maybe there's some way that they come through and it turns out wonderful. Maybe it ends up being an ironic ending where they get one thing but they lose the other. But just putting us through that emotional ringer is going to make that movie amazing. So something to think about. Number 3, And this is a strategy you can use, especially when your script isn't working. I'm going to say it. It's going to sound so light. And then I'll give you an explanation and it'll make sense. Write it in one page until you are completely inspired. Write it in one page until you're completely inspired. I had a writer who was in one of our classes who told me he did this and it didn't work. And I said, okay, email me your one page. And he goes, well, he said, I'll get it to you a little later. I said, no, do it right now. If you said it didn't work, I want to see it right now. And he sent me the one page, and I looked at it, and I said, okay, let me just ask you, did you honor the last part? Write it in one page until you're completely inspired. Because I'm reading this, and it's not very inspiring. He says, that's what I mean. It didn't work. I said, okay, so you haven't gone through the rest of it. So here's the way this works. The version 1 is a book report of a previous draft. Version 1 is a book report of a previous draft. So you write that book report, right? That's what he had done. And so I was reading, and it's like, all right, that's your book report of your previous draft. I said, then did you do the next step? And he says, well, I felt that, this was good enough. And it's like, no, you told me it wasn't. So hang on. So version 2 is the vision of what this story can become. The vision of what this story can become. So that's what he hadn't done. That was the part he hadn't done. What he had done was he had written that one page and saw why his script wasn't inspiring. He got to see the book report, and it wasn't interesting. And so what I'm suggesting you do, and we've done this with lots of writers before, but I've had lots of writers who have told me that they had success with this. And by the way, this is a strategy I used also when we wrote a screenplay that ultimately we got picked up, and it went through a whole series of processes. It looked like we had a deal up until the writer's strike happened. And then, when we got back to that particular network, the VP we were working with was gone. But that's old news. What you want to do on this is you want to say, okay, I've got this version. That's why my previous draft wasn't as strong as I want it to be. I, of course, want it to be better. That's good. So now you go through and you create a new one. And you say, what is it that inspires me about this? How can I get it to where this page only has the stuff that inspires me, that's engaging? Right? So you rewrite that one page as many times as is necessary to get to the point where it inspires you. And when I did this that one time, I actually rewrote it about 4 times. But I kept a pad of paper on the side, and I kept writing what inspires me. And I would write in a couple of ideas. And the next morning I'd get up and I'd go, is there something else about this movie that inspires me? And then I rewrote the one page. And then I took it to my wife at one point. She's been a producer before. And I said, read this, see what you think. And she read it, and she goes, that's good. And I was like, okay, not even close. I said, all right, good. Let me just ask, can you interview me real fast? And I'd like you to find out what inspires me about this movie. And she did. And by the time we were done, somewhere in there we found a way to express the thing that inspired me and express my vision in a different way, and I rewrote it, and now it was powerful. Now, this is worth doing. Let me tell you, on my end, what it did was we were on draft 4 at that particular script, and I was kind of stuck. But between draft 4 and draft 5, all I did was 2 days of writing and rewriting this one page until I got it to where it inspired me. Now, I didn't go to draft 5 yet. I did another step. I did step number 4. But let me tell you, when I did go to draft 5 about 4 days later, draft 5 improved at least 200%. Made a huge, huge difference. So let's go to number 4 here. Make sure your outline is the best expression of the pitch. make sure your outline is the best expression of the pitch. So here, what you're doing is once you've got that pitch down on that single page, and it's really powerful and it is inspiring, and I mean, when I say inspiring, you pick it up and you read it and you're inspired and you want to start writing again. When you've got it to that point, now then go to your outline. Don't go to your script yet. Go to your outline. And the reason you're going to your outline is because, you know what, it's a lot easier to be able to now make sure that 5 pages, as in the outline, is inspiring versus going to 90 pages. So at this point, you go through, and by the way, you'll see it says key. Use the blank and blank. Use the log line and 1 page to keep the story on track. So what I did on the project that we had was I pulled out the outline, and I read through the outline, and it read much like the book report. So I went back to my inspiring 1 page, and I said, how can I make this outline as inspiring as this 1 page? And there were like 60 different beats that I had listed. It turned out there were about 15 of them that I needed to improve in order to do that. And so I highlighted those, I elevated them, I worked with them until I got it to where I thought it matched. Then I went back to my own feedback source, which again is my wife, and had her read it. And once we were at a point where she was in love with it, then I wrote. So it made a huge difference. Again, it improved between draft 4 to draft 5. That script improved 200%, and it was because of this process. Okay, let's go on. Number 5, are there any story problems that need to be solved? Fill in the words story problems. My advice to you is that you solve them here. So you'll see key, solve them on level 1, not level 5. Now, let me clarify this so that it makes total sense. What I'm saying is, if you've got a story problem, solve it on the story level, on the structure level, on the plot level. Wherever that problem exists, solve it there, not on the dialogue level. Because a lot of times what people do is they go, oh, I see, I've got this problem with this inciting incident. I'll just have one character say something to another. And it's like, yes, that's a really easy fix. That's the fix you do if you're on the set and you've got a director waiting on you, and you've got actors waiting on you, and you've got the crew waiting on you. And they need to get into production right now. And it's like, okay, wait a minute, how can we solve this with the dialogue? We just change one line and it's good, right? But if you're writing it and you have the time, solve it at level 1, not level 5. Number 6, list out the subplots. So the question is, do they either, and fill in these blanks, do they either go with or against the plot? Do they either go with or against the plot? And this is just a pretty simple thing. If you've got subplots, there's a purpose for your subplots. I think, there's a lot of valuable things subplots can be used to do, but the truth is they're so overused in amateur screenplays. A lot of times when people go to subplots, the reason why is because they haven't figured out their plot. I was just on the phone with a lady who's in one of our master classes, and she's got an amazing concept. But she got a feedback from a whole bunch of people. They told her to add subplots. She added about 6 subplots to the script. And I kept going, wait a minute, no, that's not what your story's about. And finally what we realized was she had no idea it was like her plot. There was a problem in it, and she hadn't solved it. So we brainstormed and solved that plot. As soon as we solved that plot, 4 of the 6 of those subplots disappeared. They were no longer necessary. So you want to make sure, first, any subplot that you have really does need to be there, because your story isn't about the subplot. Your story is about the plot. Your story is about the lead characters. So you want to make sure that it stays centered around them as much as possible. However, there are times where you need a subplot to express a different version of the thing. So the subplot will either go with the plot, as in it expresses what the plot is about in a way that fits, right? It expresses one side of the theme. This is the positive side. Or it goes against, it expresses the negative side of the same theme. So either one of those, totally okay. Let's go to level 2 now. So now we're going to talk about elevating your characters. And here, I'm going to make some assumptions, but let me just say up front, however you created your characters are totally fine. But I'm going to ask you now, number 7, make sure your character profiles are perfect. So fill in the words character profiles. Now, why I'm asking you to do this is because the closer and closer you get to a final draft, the more specific you want each of your lead characters to be. Right? You want to start getting real clarity on who they are. And that's important, because later on you're going to be pitching them to actors, and they want to know why they're different than that other character. So that stuff's pretty important. You'll see underneath there it says key, compelling core traits, and write in these words. Compelling core traits equal compelling characters. Now, let's fill in these blanks on the right-hand side here. Character profile, you'll see there's a little box on the right-hand side there. Let's just fill in these. These are what I would call the character profile requirements. We have a bunch of optional things also when it comes to profiles that really can make a huge difference. But let's just get these in here real fast. Please put the word traits. What's your character's traits? Remember we said compelling core traits equal compelling characters? Your traits, by the way, we're talking about the core of who that character is. Anytime you see that person, those traits are going to show up. That's who they are. I have a friend who's really, really funny, and he's been funny ever since he was a kid. It's like it's part of who he is. You know, he sees things in a funny way. He expresses things in a funny way. It's just one of his traits. One day I saw him, and we met for lunch, and he wasn't funny. And it was like, wait a minute, he's being completely, quote, out of character. And it turned out he'd had a real tragedy happen in his life, and he was still living out of that. And it's like, okay, that's when somebody steps out of character. But it was noticeable because one of his core traits is that he's funny. Once he recovered from that tragedy, he went back to being funny every time we saw him. You'll have some people who they're shy. If they're in public, they're shy. And that's the way it is. There are some people who they're outgoing. There are some people who they're always angry. There are some people who are, constantly ranting. It's like you start to look at the people in your lives, and you'll start to see their core traits. What is it that's always present for them? B is their subtext. Please write in the word subtext. And in fact, while we're here, let's go down to number 9. And let me give you a simple way to think about subtext. So number 9, check out each of your main characters to make sure they have subtext. So put in the word subtext. Now, here's the thing to know. Sometimes people will say to me, but my character's nice. And I'm like, okay, so one of their traits is nice. And they'll go, yeah, so they don't have any subtext. And it's like, okay, that means they just don't understand subtext. Subtext is, and here's the easy way to think about it. Give them something, this is the key, give them something they are hiding that is relevant to the story. So fill in those two blanks, hiding and relevant. So, and it could be hiding or not talking about. And this is the distinction you need to know. There are nice forms of subtext and there are negative forms of subtext. So my stepfather, the way he expresses subtext is through politeness. And he's amazing at this. I'll give you an example. I was at a Christmas party, had an argument with my mother. It was not pleasant. This was about 10 years ago. I ended up walking out on the balcony. My stepfather comes out, and he says, "You okay?" I said, "Yeah, that didn't go well." And now here's how he expresses what's going on. I said, do you feel like I messed that up?" And he goes, instead of saying, "Yes, you did, Hal," he said, "You know what I like about you, Hal?" He says, "You always learn from things." And then he put his arm around me, gave me a quick hug, and walked back inside. And it's like, okay, that's how he expresses subtext, right? That meant something else. That meant, yeah, you messed that up really bad, but luckily you're not going to do it in the future, right? and it's like, so he has a rule. Some of you guys know people like this. His rule is, if you can't say something nice, don't say anything at all. So he finds ways to express what he's feeling in a way that is pleasant and polite. That's the thing that covers up his subtext. So it's totally okay. Nice people have subtext. Subtext is what's going on underneath the surface that they're not talking about. That's it. That's all it is. And I'm going to tell you, there's not a nice human being on the planet who doesn't have stuff under the surface they're not talking about. My dad was a minister. I grew up watching good Christian people come in every Thursday night and do therapy and go through counseling sessions, and I found out, wow, they have all kinds of things under the surface they're not talking about. But that's totally okay. That's what life's about, right? So even if you have a nice character, don't get handcuffed by that nice thing. Look for their subtext. Actors need subtext, so you got to put it in there. Let's fill in the rest of these blanks. Character profile, C, put the word flaw. Flaw. Now, flaw, real simply, in my opinion, this is my version of it. The flaw is something internal that is sabotaging their success. Something internal that is sabotaging their success. That's usually what the flaw is. So that's what you're looking for in that situation. People say, well, he's got a flaw, he's got a limp. And it's like, you know what, the limp isn't the thing that's the problem. If you watch the movie The King's Speech, it looked like the problem was all about the stutter. Right? But when you got down to it, they didn't solve that problem. In the very end, when the king finally made the announcement that they were going to war and inspired his people, he was still stuttering. The flaw wasn't stuttering. The flaw was he had a major lack of confidence to lead his people. So as soon as that was repaired, he was able to lead despite the flaw. So D, put in motivation. There are two kinds of motivation: internal motivation, external motivation. External motivation means the goal. It's the thing they're going for, the thing they're trying to accomplish. They want to win the Olympics. They want to make the $1 million, right? They want to get the guy or get the girl, whatever it is, right? That's their external motivation. Then they have an internal motivation. Why are they doing it, right? Is it for love? Is it for power? Is it for greed? Is it in order to feel like they're valuable, self-worth? Right? There's a whole bunch of different possible internal motivations. And the good thing is you can play with these and go back and forth. Finally, E, put the word wound. Wound. What is their wound that the moment that it's even touched, they flinch? Right? And this is This is something deep inside them, some major loss, some major pain that they're living with that is buried deep, and even the reference of it causes them a painful reaction. If you understand a character's wound, wow, you can do amazing things with situations that you put them in that would naturally cause that wound to be inflamed. So, something valuable to consider. All right, let's continue. Now we're on number 10. Improve one relationship at a time. So you don't just want to look at your characters, you want to look at how your characters interact with other characters. What's the relationship? And you'll see a whole list of different possible relationships there. But let's go down to number 11 and we'll talk about what creates those relationships. So number 11, character relationships that work. This is something I'm going to fill these in right now, but I want you to pick your favorite TV series and take these 3 things I'm about to give you and watch one episode, stopping at the end of every scene and asking yourself, are these 3 things present? And you will have huge breakthroughs because they do such a great job on TV right now with this kind of stuff. It's amazing. But let's just start. So A, are there similarities to build rapport? And when you do this, don't just watch for the people who are great friends. Watch also for the people who hate each other. So they did an amazing job of this on the show Scandal. It's like they did such a good job. And let me finish them off, and then we'll talk about it. So A, are there similarities to build rapport? B, are there differences that cause conflict? And C, do they have competing agendas that increase the subtext and conflict? So Scandal, if you watch it, it's like, wow, they've constantly got conflict between the characters. But they've also got, it's like, here are all these characters that are interacting in some way. They all have similarities. Even when they hate each other, they have similarities. They have differences, and there's a ton of competing agendas. But what I thought was really interesting was at one point the guy who we think is the bad guy shifts sides basically, and now it's looking like he's the good guy, and he still has they still have the same relationship problems going on. They still have the same things. They still have similarities, differences, and competing agendas. And it's like when you watch it, you'll see this. This stuff stands out. Any TV series, just watch one episode, pausing and looking for these 3 things. I started this with Seinfeld, and I was shocked. It was like, wow, if you look at it from this perspective, you would say that's all they're doing. And then you'll look at it from another perspective, and you'll see that too. They do such great writing. It's amazing. All right, let's go on to number 12. Character journeys we care about. First, look at each of your characters and ask, what is their individual journey? Now, this is really going to be important when, and this is the next line, when you compare protagonist to antagonist. A lot of times, people created the story primarily or almost totally about their protagonist, and the antagonist is just the bad guy. But you need to also then find out what's your antagonist individual journey. What's their journey? Right? What are they there for? What's going on with them? Their life isn't just about being the bad guy to this one good guy. So what's going on with them? Now, you're going to get lots of information in the midst of that, and then you choose which ones you use. Underneath that, it says blank causes some change for the lead characters. Please put the words supporting characters cause some change for the lead characters. And on this, it's like It's like, here's what you don't want. What you don't want is you don't want your supporting characters usurping your leads, because that's a business mistake. Major actors will not sign on when they see supporting characters that are more interesting, more compelling than their leads. So you got to make sure you take care of that. What you do want is supporting characters who really are supporting. That's what they do. And then second, at some point, they do something that causes a change for that lead. Right? They're there the whole time, helping out, being the friend, being the sounding board, whatever it is. And at some point, they say, hey, listen, what you're doing here is not right. And now they shift things, or they save the day in some way, or they force that character to try a different strategy or something like that. Somewhere along the way, they have their moment. Now, then they go back to being a supporting character, because that's what this movie is about. Number 13, and this is one of the ones that can change your life. I've already talked about it quite a bit in the very beginning. Introduce your lead characters powerfully. Introduce your lead characters powerfully. So, again, assume when you create the introduction for your lead character, assume this. So you'll see the word advertisement. It's an advertisement for an A-list actor. So just make that assumption. What you're trying to do is you are trying to have an actor read that particular part and fall in love with the role and decide that this is going to be their movie. So let me talk about how to do it. Go on the right-hand side there. You'll see it says lead character introductions in the box. Please fill in these words. And we'll start with the very bottom one. Number 4, put the word description. This is the one that most people have a tendency to be fanatical about. They work on descriptions incessantly. And I'm going to tell you it's the least important of the 4. So, so many times people are trying to figure out how do they describe this character perfectly and all that kind of thing. Let me give you an example, and you'll see it really fast. You'll see why the other 3 are actually far more important. And we'll start with this one. Geoffrey Rush, from the movie Shakespeare in Love, they asked him, what caused you to sign on to this movie? And he said, I was in my agent's office. He handed me this script. I was maybe 3 pages into it. I was laughing out loud. It was so full of invention. I looked up and said, I have to be in this movie. Now, please notice what just happened. An A-list actor just made a decision to sign on to this project 3 pages in. And the reason why was because his character was introduced in those first 3 pages, and it was done in an amazing way. So let's just talk about that. Number 1, and this is the lead character introduction. First, you're introducing through situation. So put in the word situation. His character was put in a challenging situation. If you remember, that movie opens, they're in a theater. We hear howling behind the curtain. We cut back there and we find out that his character's tied to a chair. They've got his feet held over the fire and they're torturing him. So he's in a very difficult situation. Number 2, please put in the words initial action. Initial action. So here's what happened in that situation was they were trying to get money from him. He owed them money. And his initial action or reaction is to negotiate first and then to pitch. And so he pitches this screenplay or this play by William Shakespeare. And he doesn't do a real good job of it, but it's enough that it works. And then this becomes number 3. Please put the words initial dialogue. Initial dialogue. So his dialogue was witty. It was engaging, right? It was surprising in some ways. If you just go read that scene, you will see why he chose to sign on. Now, the other thing that happened in that scene was he basically promises them this play by Will Shakespeare, and then in the very next scene we find out that Will Shakespeare has writer's block, and so that means Henslow's in trouble again. But notice this: if you read through that, here's what you'll find out. The majority of the scene is about the situation, the initial action, the initial dialogue, and there's only about 2 lines that even describe what Henslow looks like. It's like so minimalized, because all the rest is what makes it amazing. So just remember that. Okay. So our job is to create a really interesting lead character and then introduce them as powerfully as possible. Let me now take you to the opposite end, and there's something else that you can do that's incredibly powerful. That's number 14. How do your main characters end? And I'm going to tell you the insight I had in just a second. Let's fill in this blank first, though. Do they need to be set up more powerfully? So you start with their ending. Go look at how your main characters end. Now, it wasn't until I started talking to actors' production companies that I realized, you know what, a lot of times they look at how the character begins, and then they go straight to the end to see how the character ends. How do they go out? Will that character be remembered by how they go out? Is it interesting? Is it compelling? All of those kinds of things. Is it something that when people walk out of the theater, that's what they're going to be talking about on Facebook and Twitter? So you want to go to their ending first and look to see, is it interesting? Is it compelling? And is it a fitting end for that character? And then you want to go back and say, does it need to be set up more powerfully? Because sometimes it's like you could take the exact same ending, and if you want to set it up in a way where we cheer, that's one thing. Then yes, you set up difficulties along the way and problems for the character, and then by the end, we cheer. If you want to set it up where we cry when they win, then you go back and humiliate them in a big way. And now when they finally come through, we're touched deeply. So just a thought. There's lots of things you can do in the setup and the payoff of that particular ending. But let me take this one step further. I was on the phone with Michael Hurst, the writer-producer of The Tudors. And this was back when that show was on the air. I think it was HBO or Showtime. I think we were between season 3 and season 4. And I asked him a whole bunch of questions, but one of them was, what do you have coming up, and what's your biggest challenge for next season? And he said, well, my biggest challenge is that during this time period in history, 10 of the royals were put to death by beheading. And I was like, oh, cool. And he goes, yeah. So he says, 10 of my 13 episodes end with a beheading. And he says, in the beginning we were just thinking, oh, this is really easy. It's an emotional moment. But he says after you've seen one beheading and then the second and then the third, after a while, it's just like anything else. It gets bland. So I had to go back and look at each one of them and say, what's unique about them? And he said the part of the problem is they were beheaded in the same place, in the same way. But what was unique about them was the characters, right? So he said each one of them came to their own ending, and this is what he had to discover and he had to create. Each one of them came to their own ending in their own unique way that highlighted who they were as a character. Now think about that for a moment. So he had one person who had been pretending he was a hero all his life, but the truth was he was a coward. And so that came out in a huge way right as he was about to be beheaded, as he was going to the gallows. right? We had one person who was such a royal, pompous thing, and she was making demands all the way there, and everything had to be perfect, and all this other kind of stuff, right? And it's like each one of them, he highlighted some part of who that character was, took it to an extreme, and had it show up in those last moments in a way that made their beheading completely different from all the others. So that shifted how I thought about how characters end. Because at that moment I went, wow, maybe we should be looking way deeper into who this character is and finding a way that they end in the most fitting way possible for who they are. And it doesn't have to be that they end by dying. It could be they end by getting fired. It could be they end by getting promoted. It could be that they end by winning the game, whatever it is. But it's done in a way that's unique to who they are. If you can do that, it's going to make it a lot easier for actors to say yes to you. Okay, let's go to the next page. Level 3. Now we're talking about creating challenging situations. And we talked about this earlier, but now let's just get it really clear. So, 15. How can my situations challenge my lead characters? So fill in that word challenge. And by the way, underneath it, it says situation equal. Please put in these words. Your situation equals the circumstances that you put your characters in. Here's the good news. You are the writer. You're the one who gets to choose these things. Right now. Now, maybe later a producer may change their mind and want it done in a different way and that kind of thing. But right now, you get to choose the kinds of circumstances you put your characters in. So my advice would be that you put them in challenging circumstances. And that means you can challenge their goals. You can, as in if they're going for a particular goal, anything that you put in the way, any roadblock challenges that goal. You can challenge their values. So if they're somebody who has never told a lie, then in order for them to have this success for the first time, they're going to have to lie. If they're somebody who integrity and honesty has been the most important thing, then they're going to violate that particular value at some point along the way. Doing that kind of thing is not a bad thing. It actually is something that makes it more interesting, more emotionally engaging, and that kind of thing for us. You could also challenge them physically. This could be somebody's in the way. It could be the car breaks down. It could be somebody tries to stop them from achieving their goal. However you challenge them, if pretty much every scene has some kind of challenge or every other scene, then what you're going to do is you're going to be engaging the audience, which takes us to the next one. Every scene is another opportunity to, please fill in the blanks, re-engage the reader. Number 16. Now we're going to take it one step further. Now what I want you to do is I want you to go back through your script and do a specific pass that's just about this one thing. During this pass, I want you to write through interest. Write through interest. So what this means, it's like it's easy for people to think about writing, if they have a comedy, going through and doing a pass where they're just trying to make things funny. And all they're doing on that pass is trying to find anything that they could make more funny. They're trying to make sure they have a laugh a page, all that kind of thing. This is the same kind of thing, except this time what you want to do is you want to look and find anything that could be dull, and the question is, how do you make it more interesting? Right? And that may mean you use a different interest technique, right? Instead of a twist, you may use suspense. You may set it up so that we know something bad's going to happen, and it's like, oh my God, please don't open that door. Don't open that door. Oh no, she opened it, right? Or you may use surprise. It may be a thing where somebody's just walking along and all of a sudden somebody jumps out at them, right? The big surprise. You could mislead reveal. You could set it up so that we believe things are going in a certain direction and that these characters are a certain way, and then you reveal who they really are, right? All of these kinds of things create interest. Now I think we've got about 15 different interest techniques. And the job is to mix them up, but also to start to look, especially at the areas that are dull, and see how you can improve them. Underneath that, it says, look at every scene and ask, and this is the second thing you want to do, does this situation entertain? So entertain means it either creates interest or it creates emotion. Does it do anything that creates one of those two? If it's just interesting to you, that's not good enough. If it's just emotional for you, that's not good enough. The question is, does it do it for your reader? So let's go to the next level. Now we're going to be talking about action with meaning. So I'm going to say there are two types of action. There's visual action, visual action, which means there's an action taking place on the screen. So we're watching some kind of movement. Now, this could be small movement. It could be huge movement. It could be two people pushing each other around. It could be a nuclear war going on, right? But there's something interesting on the screen. And then B, there's meaningful action. And meaningful action means it delivers the meaning of the scene. So the action itself delivers the meaning, not the dialogue, the action, right? If you go back to the Quentin Tarantino scene we talked about, these two guys drive in, they open up the trunk, they pull out guns. That action delivers some meaning. Now they go inside, there's an interrogation, they shoot the guy next to him. That action delivers meaning. Now there's the Bible verse, they spin, they both start shooting. That action delivers meaning, right? So you're looking for that. So the process is real simple. First you ask, what is the meaning of the scene? And once you're clear on that, and by the way, the meaning might show up in the dialogue. What is the meaning of the scene? Once you're clear on that, then the question is, how can I deliver it through the action? So that's a pretty easy thing. So let me give you an example. Let's say what you were doing was you've got a scene, the boss and the employee argue, the boss fires the employee. So, yes, there's a whole big argument that goes on, and there's all kinds of information that happens in the midst of that. But what we want to do is we want to translate this into action instead of just dialogue. So we go back and look at that scene, and you start to ask yourself, first, what's the meaning of the scene? The meaning is this guy's fired, right? Okay, great. How can I deliver that meaning through the action? Well, it could be that the guy comes back from lunch, and when he walks into his cubicle, there sits another employee. And then he looks down to the left, and all of his stuff has been boxed up. Right? So it's like, that's a simple meaning. Could be that he comes back from lunch, and here's a couple of security guards, and they escort him out and then hand him his pink slip. They don't have to say a word. And we get the meaning. He's been fired, right? So you could brainstorm a bunch of different ways to do that. So let's go to the next page. Level 5, entertaining dialogue. Now, I told you up front, and this is what it says on number 18, dialogue is not about telling the story. So write those words in. It's not about telling the story. So what is it about then? So here's A through D. First, and by the way, this isn't 100%, but if you kind of use this as a rule, if you start to say, wait a minute, my dialogue could be about something else besides telling the story. It's like, if you think about it, there's lots and lots of ways things are delivered, lots of experiences that happen in a movie. The music helps us, all that kind of thing. Now, you can't write music in. But it's like when you actually watch the movie, the music delivers certain things. The visuals deliver certain things, right? What people do is they get confused along the way because dialogue is the easiest place to have the character explain about their life. So this is one of those places where you don't want to take the easy way out at the present moment. So if you put the meaning beneath the surface, then your dialogue is going to be free, so you can do anything you want with it. So here's what I'd like to suggest you do. A, put the words deliver character. deliver character. And I'm going to give you a really great way to do that in number 19. B, put the words entertain. Entertain. So you want dialogue to entertain. You want it to create emotion. C, put the words point to subtext. So you want your dialogue to, at different times, remind us that there's some subtext beneath the surface. It may point to it directly. It may just be that somebody's asking a question. There was one movie where just the word really was used. The person would say something about who they were, and the other person would go, really? Really? And what was really being said was, you're not who you say you are. And that kept pointing us to something under the surface that we later discovered that they truly weren't who they said they were. And then D, put the words create anticipation. So you want to use dialogue to have us look into the future constantly. If there's something in the future that we're worried about, every time they reference it, we get more concerned about the future. Just them asking about it. There was a movie called 3 O'Clock High, where the nerdy kid who worked for the high school paper had to interview the new kid at school, not knowing that kid was the bully who beat the principal up at the last school, and that's why he got transferred here. First thing he does is he goes in and he pats the guy on the arm, and that kid hates being touched. And so the bully said, I'm going to meet you at 3 o'clock in the parking lot. I'm going to kick your ass. Now, the whole rest of the movie is, how does the nerdy guy escape from this? How many different ways can he possibly get out of it? But the reason I'm talking about this is because they did a great job of creating anticipation. People would show up and they'd go, I heard you're going to fight the bully at 3 o'clock. Is that right? And then somebody else would show up and go, do you know how to fight? Right? They're all pointing towards the future. It's like, you're not going to show up, are you? That's pointing towards that future. So, and they must have done it 50 different ways. And every single time it created anticipation. Every single time it had us wonder what's going to happen at 3 o'clock. So let's go down here. Number 19. Unique character dialogue. So this is another one of these that can change your life. And it really can. I'm not kidding about this. And here's why. When a producer picks up your script, even if they only read 3 or 4 pages, if each of your main characters have their own unique way of communicating, and as in coming from who they are, the producer's instantly going to notice that you're amazing at dialogue. Now, let me tell you what I'm not talking about. I'm not talking about stutters. I'm not talking about accents. I'm not talking about them saying or doing weird things, that kind of thing. What I'm talking about is them coming from that character profile that you created of who they are. They will have their own unique way of communicating. If you even think about it this way, in a real simple way, an engineer, then these are just such general terms. An engineer is going to talk in certain ways. They're going to talk through processes. They're going to talk through plans. They're going to have certain ways of thinking that are common with them. An attorney is going to have different ways of thinking that are very common, right? This is real obvious stuff. But what we're saying here is we're saying based on who your characters are inside their character profiles, what their traits are, what their subtext is, what their flaw is, what their wound is, what their motivation is, all of those kinds of things. Based on those, they are going to talk differently than someone who has completely different traits, subtext, flaws, motivation, wound, right? So this is your chance to have them express who they are in this unique way. So let me tell you how to do it. Number one, or A, you're going to isolate one line at a time of character A. Let's fill in these blanks and then I'll explain it. A, you're going to isolate one line at a time of character A. B, you're going to rewrite as you think through their profile only. Rewrite as you think through their profile only. And then see one character per day. So let me tell you how this works. Let's say your lead character's name is Roger. And Roger is in a triangle that turns out to be a love triangle with Shauna, his girlfriend, and Billy, his best friend. So there's your triangle. We come in the very opening scene. Here's Billy and Shauna sitting together in a restaurant. Roger comes in. Now, if the first line he says, and this I see this kind of stuff all the time, is very generic, you want to do something immediately to fix it. So let's say his first line is, "Hey, how are you?" What you're going to do on this is you're going to say, "Today is Roger. Today I'm going to go through and I'm going to work with every line of Roger's dialogue." So you go to the very beginning of the script, you'll open it up, you'll go down until you find Roger's first line. So there it says, "Hey, how are you?" So now we go look at Roger's profile. Pull out Roger's profile and look at his profile and then ask, is there anything from that profile showing up in that line of dialogue? So let's say Roger's profile, let's say he's revenge-oriented. Let's say he's gracious, he's deceitful, and he's violent. Very likely Roger is going to be our antagonist in this situation. But let's say those are his traits, right? So when he walks in and says, "Hey, how are you?" I'm looking back and I'm going, okay, wait a minute. If he's revenge-oriented, is that what he would say? Right? And instead he might walk in and the very first thing he does is make a threat. That might be his opening line. He's gracious. He might walk in and say, hey, how are you in French or something. He's deceitful. Maybe what we just saw was him plugging the waitress in the back room, and now he's coming in and seeing his girlfriend, and the first thing he does is lie about where he's been. Now, it doesn't have to be brilliant. Just the fact that his opening line was a lie shows he's deceitful, right? So even if he just says, "Yeah, traffic was murder," right? It's like, that's still a cliche. I would try to come up with something better, but at least we have him doing something that fits who his character is. If he's violent, he may walk in, punch Billy. Now Billy's on the ground. He steps on Billy's throat, and then he turns and looks at Shauna and says, "Hey, how are you?" Now in this case, the line plays. And the reason it plays is because it's juxtaposed what he's doing, right? So the action and the line are total opposites. And in this case, it actually communicates subtext. He's saying, yeah, this isn't going to happen. So we're getting a chance to see who he is through his dialogue. So you rewrite that line, and you deliver one of his traits through that line. Now we go to the next line of dialogue. We skip Billy's line, we skip Shauna's line, we get down to Roger's next line. Again, we look at his profile. Is there anything from that profile showing up in this line of dialogue? If there's not, you rewrite it. Now let me tell you what will happen. In the beginning, it'll be like you'll be struggling with it. It's like, well, God, I don't know. How do I express these traits? By the time you've done 10 of these lines, you will internalize who Roger is. And by the way, you'll get this process. You'll get really good at it. But you'll internalize who Roger is, and you'll get to the next line, and you'll go, oh, he wouldn't say it that way. He'd say it this way. And at that moment, you got it. Now, keep the profile out and keep referencing it all the way through, because you want to get better and better and better at it. But what you're going to do is you're going to go through every single line of dialogue for Roger today, all the way to the end of the script. Don't even look at the others. You do not want to blend the characters here. Once you get to the end, come back and redo the first 10 so that you got them, and then sleep Roger off. Come in the next day and pick the next character. Maybe you're going to do Shauna that day. You pull out her profile, look at her first line of dialogue. Is there anything from this profile showing up in that line of dialogue? If so, or if not, you rewrite it. If so, you move on. So that should make sense. Again, what this does is it sets you up as a writer, one of the very, very few who can write character dialogue in a way so we get character. And so that every character has their own unique way of speaking. Again, no stutters, no through chawing tobacco. Nobody cares. That's old. This is no accents. This isn't about that. Now, and by the way, you may have a character who has an accent, but if that's the primary way you're trying to make their dialogue unique, that is old school. That doesn't work anymore. So remember that. Okay. Now let's go to wordsmithing. So we've spent all this time getting everything done beneath the surface. Now I'm going to give you two things that can make a huge difference for you in your wordsmithing. Pretty much most writers know how to do this. There's a ton of information out there on wordsmithing and editing scripts and all of that. What I want to do is I want to give you the things that will help you from a producer's perspective. In the midst of interviewing all these producers, I had this one day where somebody in the group, and a lot of times I do my interviews in front of audiences, somebody in the group had asked this one question of all the producers: what scripts would you recommend that we read? And so they asked the question, the first producer says, well, there's a screenplay that I recently read. It's a really fast read. And then he pitched it. And so then this other producer comes in, and the guy asks the same question, and those meetings we would interview him for an hour, and at the end I'd give him Q&A. And this producer, she says, there's a script floating around town right now that really you want to get your hands on. If you can read this, it's amazing. It's a very dense read. And then she pitched it. So I said to her, okay, we've had 3 producers in, 2 so far, before they even told us what the script was or even what the title was, told us it was a fast read, and you just told us this one was a dense read. I think I'd just like to highlight why. Now, I already know the reason, but I want them to know the reason. So I said, she says, well, everybody in this town is reading 10 to 15 screenplays a week after working 12 hours a day. So she goes, it's really important to us that a script is a fast read. She goes, a lot of times it'll be a thing of, okay, you know what, I've got to read it while I'm eating dinner, and I've only got 45 minutes or an hour. I need to get through this script as quickly as I can. She goes, if it's a dense read, I can't do that. So we notice when something's a fast read or it's not. So this is one of the keys. It says success equals, put the words a fast read. Success equals a fast read. And let me give you the simple ways to do this. Number 1 is get it in glances. Get it in glances. So what you want to be able to do is you want somebody to be able to read your script, and they're reading like they're only reading dialogue. And as they're going along and reading, if there's description there, you want them to naturally read it without choice. And what that means is this. Let's say somebody's reading the dialogue, and let's say there's 6 lines of dialogue in a row. 6 different characters talking. And then we hit description. If it's like 6 lines of description, they have a choice. They can jump over it to the dialogue that's below and not even read it. And they don't even notice it because it's a big clump of writing. But let's say the line of description there is only 6 words. So there's 5 or 6 lines of dialogue, and then there's 6 words of description. I'm going to tell you they can't stop themselves from reading that because they get it in a glance. Even if they just glance at it, they read it, right? So if you can set it up so that your script has a whole lot of get it in a glance kinds of situations with the description, you have a much better chance they're going to read all of your description. Because you're training them to read it. You're saying, look, most of this you can get real simply, and the stuff you get simply is important. So that means when I do ask you to read 3 or 4 lines straight, that also is important. So please consider that. Here's the second thing. If you're trying to get it down to the glances, you need more meaning, and this is number 2, more meaning, fewer words. More meaning, fewer words. And what this means is you're a writer, right? You know how to do this stuff. You're going to bring a page of description down to a paragraph. You're going to find a way to bring a paragraph down to a single line. You're going to find a way to bring a full line down to 3 or 4 words. It's absolutely possible. It's just you've got to think that way, and you've got to look for it. I had one guy who he had this bar, a country bar, being described. And this lady from Beverly Hills, her card broken down. This is on the very first page. Halfway down the page, she walks into the only building in sight, which is this country bar. He then spent 2.5 pages describing what the inside of the bar looked like. And he went on and on about the matty feel of the floor, about the animal heads that were on the walls, about the rednecks over in the corner, about the beard of the bartender, all that kind of thing. And I said, here, what you've got, my friend, is 3 pages of stop signs. Please, we need to find a way to bring this down so that by the end of the first page, she is into the conflict with the bartender. It took him about 3 days. And what I liked about it was he went back and did it. And here's what he came back with. She steps inside the bar, looks around, and ready for this? This next set of words replaced 2.5 pages. It's redneck heaven. So with that single description that we could get in a glance, he cut out 2.5 pages of stop signs. That's powerful writing. And you can do this kind of stuff. You just have to start to think, how do I write in a way that is more precise, more powerful, that gives us essence, not tiny details, that kind of thing. How do I deliver this experience to a reader? Okay, so that's the first thing. Number 21, now let's talk about creating memorable moments that sell your screenplay. And this is something to know. Readers are looking for this. Now, they may not use the words I just used. A lot of times they'll say they're looking for trailer moments. But what everybody knows is when a movie comes out, there are certain lines that could stick in our consciousness for a long period of time. And believe it or not, those lines get people to buy that movie. You know, like when you're talking about lines like, you had me at hello, right? It's like, you know what? That movie came out, Jerry Maguire. That line, within a week or two after you had me at, or after Jerry Maguire came out, within a week or two, I heard 2 different news anchors use that line. Within a month, it was on Saturday Night Live. Then it started being parodied on other shows. And then it actually got into 2 or 3 different movies besides that. So every time somebody heard that line, they thought back to Jerry Maguire. Now, lines like this help. If you look at, Casablanca. Everybody, when you say Casablanca, people know that movie, right? Part of it is because they have 7 lines that were in the AFI most quoted movie lines, and that's astounding. There are so many lines inside that movie. You know, here's looking at you, kid. That the moment that you hear those lines, you think Casablanca. So it's an advertisement, right? So people inside this industry know this stuff, and when they see those done well, they're interested. Now, let me tell you, there's a pattern to this. It's not just that a line works. You may come up with a brilliant line, and if you put it in the wrong place, it doesn't work. If you don't set it up properly, it doesn't work. If you take the line, frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn. right? Hopefully you've got it. That came from Gone with the Wind. But if you get down to it, if you put that line in the beginning of the movie, it would have had no impact whatsoever. But it was in the end of the movie. We had been wanting him to say that to Scarlett throughout the whole movie. We got to the very end. Here's this scene. All these terrible things have happened. Everybody's been to war. Scarlett has thrown herself on the floor and is in the middle of a tantrum. He's about to leave, and she says, "Oh my God, what will come of me?" Right? And it's like, and for the first time, he says what we've needed him to say this whole time. But remember, there's an emotional build-up to this. There's all kinds of things that happened to build us up to this emotional moment. And he's standing at the door about to walk out. She's not saying, "I want you to stay." She's basically having a pity party for herself, and that's when he says the line, "Frankly, my dear, I don't give a damn." Right? And it's like, okay, that's what made that line famous, was the build-up, the setup, and what it meant at that moment, right? So here's how you do this, because you can do this in your script. You probably have 4 or 5 places that are already set up for this. So first, you go find the 5 most emotional moments. So this is A, B, and C. A, find the 5 most emotional moments in your script. That's A. And you can find those pretty easily. It's if you even think about it for 1 minute, your script, you'll be able to pick out what do you think are the 5 or 6 most emotional moments. B, go to the height of the emotion. So this is the pattern is emotion builds up to a point that's very, very tense. Right? This is the moment that Scarlett's on the floor and he's at the door and he's about to leave, and this is what she says to him. Go to the height of that emotion, and at that point, look at the line of dialogue that's there. Often people will put a cliche line of dialogue there, or they'll put a line that dissipates the emotion. What I would like you to do is I'd like you to brainstorm 30 different possible lines. And look for what could they do to increase the emotion, or to deliver it in a unique way, or to give us a unique perspective on this situation. Right? Brainstorm 30 lines, because that moment is going to be one of those moments where you are going to shine as a screenwriter. And it may be one of those moments where a producer may say yes to your script just because they went, "Wow, that was amazing. I loved what they did with this." Right? Because you took them to a deeply emotional moment, and then you did something amazing instead of taking them there and then just doing something bland. So this stuff is powerful stuff. It can make a huge, huge difference for you. Now, let me just say this. You guys had a chance to listen to this class. If you've listened to any of our other classes, we have some free ones. Screenwriting U is all about making sure writers really do have a chance in this industry. We're about helping writers be able to really give themselves a chance to make this dream happen. If you like what you heard here today, this is just the tip of the iceberg. Our programs take this so much further than this, and our programs are about not just giving people information, but making sure that you have higher level skills and that you build those skills into your way of writing. When you get to the point where you're working with producers or trying to get an agent or a manager, you know what? They are going to be so happy to see that you have the kind of skills that we're talking about. If you go in without these skills, wow, that's when people talk about how difficult it is and how impossible and all those other kinds of things. That's what they're really talking about. Almost always when somebody tells me it's not possible, I can look at their writing, and within 1 page I can tell you why it's not possible for them. So it's not that it's not possible for them. It's just that at the current skill level, that's where they're at. But like anything else, if you know what to do, you can elevate your skills. So what we bring to the table is what we call expert models on how to do all of these things. We make sure that you understand what producers need, what agents need, what managers need, why they need it, why these skills are so important, exactly how to use them. We make the complex simple. That's one of the big things we do, so that you can apply it right now. I do not want people walking around going, "Oh my God, I have no idea what they meant." Right? We make it as simple and as clear as possible. This is not one of these. There are some people out there who try to train screenwriters in a way that is so academic and so highbrow that it's just about impossible to be able to translate it into your writing. We're the opposite of that. We make it easy for you to be able to succeed, and that's why we have so many writers who have made deals. So if you liked what you heard here today, and if what you want to do is take your writing to a whole new level and have the chance to really be able to succeed in this industry, come join us. I promise you, if you go through this Pro Series, it'll be one of the best decisions you've ever made for your screenwriting. And it'll make a tremendous difference in your writing. We have people who go through it and come out at the other end. The majority of the people, by the way, who return evaluations at that point say that their screenwriting has improved by at least 200%. And the reason why, by the way, is because they've been learning every day, they've been creating every day, and they've been writing every day all the way through the program. And they've taken on new skills that have made a huge difference. So it's absolutely logical that somebody going through this program is going to have a major leap in their ability to write screenplays. So, if this is something you like, and what you'd like to do is to take your writing to that kind of level, and the good news on this is once you've gone through the Pro Series, then you're invited into our alumni, which is an instant network. If any of those are appealing to you, come join us. Right? I mean, this really, if you think about it, I've had probably 50 writers tell me that we should raise our prices because this price is at 1/4 of the cost of a similar kind of program at UCLA. But our program is producing about 50 times the results of those other programs when it comes to getting people to their first deal and being able to make things happen. So just step in. The program starts on July 25th, and that'll be the Pro Series, which starts then. It'll go for 6 months. By the end of those 6 months, you will look back at anything you've written before that you thought was perfect, and you will see so many ways you can instantly improve it. Your writing will improve dramatically during that period of time. So I'm going to close it up at this point. Listen, I want to say thanks for spending the time with me today. I hope this made a big difference for you. Even if you apply just what we just gave you, I think this is going to improve your screenplays. If what you want to do is take it to a new level, then just take a simple step and click the link when you get the email and sign up for the Pro Series. Taking that one step will probably save you 4 or 5 years of wandering around wondering whether or not you could make it. So even from that perspective, it's worth it. And I promise you, once you get inside and once you're part of our programs, you will love being part of our alumni. It is an amazing group. We take really good care of them, and these people are succeeding because of the things that we've brought them. So I'm wishing you guys the best, and if you come join us, I promise you, it'll be one of the best things you've ever done for your writing. With that, I'm going to close out. This is Hal Croasman with Screenwriting U, saying bye-bye, everybody.